the Detroit Pistons got a whole lot better this offseason, and this particular starting lineup is going to surprise everyone.
Lane, sky's a jam. Dynamite dunk, and the crowd loves it.
Welcome back to Pistons Intellect. I'm your host, Jack Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Jack_Kelly_3on3. You can also follow us over on Instagram at Pistons_Intellect. And if you're feeling so kind, please hit that subscribe button. Firstly, just want to quickly apologize for the lack of episodes in the past week or so. I was away on vacation and got a few episodes out while I was away, but just struggled to get some things recorded earlier this week. But we are back now, and I'm aiming to do 2 episodes per week all the way up until the season. So thanks for sticking with me. But as I mentioned off the top, I put out a graphic earlier today signaling my ideal starting 5 for the Detroit Pistons. And it's a lineup which I think is very capable of winning the Pistons some games this upcoming season. And I think is a lineup which is going to surprise a lot of people, particularly outside of the Pistons community, who pretty much paid no attention to the Pistons after their losing streak was broken. And I'll get straight to it here. The starting 5 I have for the Pistons on opening night so far, with the current roster. So just, of course, there's still, I feel like the Pistons roster is set in terms of, the players that will be in the rotation, but barring a major trade of some sort, this starting 5 is the starting 5 I believe the Pistons will open with opening night and should open with. And I'll explain that why in a minute. But as you can see here, you have Cade Cunningham, who I would have at the point guard position, Jaden Ivey, who I would have at the 2 guard position, Simone Fontecchio, who I would have at the small forward position, Tobias Harris, who the Pistons signed this offseason to a 2-year, $52 million deal. I would have him at the power forward position, and then Jalen Duren at the center position. Now, the reason I think this is the best lineup, and I'm going to go through some of the strengths here, but I think this lineup has the best balance of shooting, of rebounding, of size, and shot creation ability. Now, a lot of people have pushed back to me and said they think Asar Thompson should be in for Ivy or Fontecchio, which I do understand. That was probably the most popular response I got. And the only reason I don't have Asar in this lineup is mainly because of the jumper. But to be honest, more importantly, I just don't know if his handle is there right now to put him in for an Ivy or, without a good enough handle. I think Cade, as much as we want him to have the ball in his hand as much, and I know he has Tobias, I still want to try and see as much of him and Ivy can play together. And I think Ivy can still play well off of Cade. We just haven't seen a whole heap of it. But that's why Asar's not there. But I think this lineup gives you such a good blend of people who can create their shot, and not in ISO situations, but players that teams have to defend and honor with a decent defender. You have Harris and Fontecchio, who are both shooters. Fontecchio shot 42%, I believe, with the Pistons, and is a guy teams cannot leave open. Tobias, percentages as a 3-point shooter isn't as high as Fontecchio. He's more like a 36 to 38% 3-point shooter, but he's definitely a guy teams aren't leaving open, and is a guy that will command attention. And then Jaden Ivey, whose jumper has been very inconsistent, and he will need to knock down shots. But I think the way he can get up and down in transition, the way he can create open looks for Cade, Tobias, and Fontecchio when he's getting downhill attacking and drawing in the defense, I think is a huge bonus for this group. And then Jalen Duren, I think, is kind of the de facto center at the moment. He needs to really step it up defensively, but I think as a rebounder, he needs to start, because I love Isaiah Stewart, but I just think he's a tad too undersized to be starting at the center position. But and I think Duran and Cade Cunningham have extremely good chemistry in the pick and roll. That's one thing that's made it really hard for me when looking at this lineup. And I've been pretty vocal about my disappointment in Duran's defense, but it's undeniable how effective him and Cade are on the offensive end. It's kind of frustrating because on offense, Jalen Duran is so good at rolling to the rim. He's so good at offensive rebounding. When he wants to, he's a really solid passer at the center position. And yeah, you only had to watch go back and watch. I think it was Cade's last 3 games. I think they played the Wizards, Timberwolves, and another team. But that Timberwolves and Wizards game, Cade and Duran's chemistry was off the charts in the pick and roll. Like the way he screens, rolls, the way Cade reads the defense in those scenarios, like it's actually just a joy to watch. And it's kind of what makes it a bit frustrating for me that Duran hasn't been able to show a whole heap defensively so far. But, this is a big season for him, and I would like to think he can take some strides this season. I don't think by any means we should expecting him to be knocking on the door of all defensive or that kind of thing. But I think he's more than capable of taking some strides on that end and giving us a reason to believe he can be the center of the future, because he certainly has all the tools. But the stat I wanted to read out for this lineup, which kind of just reinforces why I think it is the best starting group, is because the 4-man lineup last season, or the Detroit Pistons' best 4-man combination last season that played a minimum of 200 minutes. There was around 8 or 9 lineups that played over 200 minutes of 4 players. The 4-man lineup of Cade, Ivy, Fontecchio, and Duran was the best for the Pistons. They were plus 1.7 points per 100 possessions. I think they scored 110 points per 100 possessions and allowed around 108.5. So, and that was on last season's team. Now you're plugging in Tobias Harris, a proven guy who's going to get you 17 to 21 points a night on decent efficiency on top of that. So you'd expect the per 100 possession scoring to go up. The defense, I would say, would stay the same, in my opinion. I don't think Tobias is that big of a negative defender, even if he's not a good defender. So I really like this starting 5. I think most people were 100% locked in, agreed with me on Cade, Tobias, and Duran. Most that I saw were okay with Ivy or Fontecchio, but those two were definitely the ones that people were kind of questioning, which I get. There's honestly a whole heap of lineups you can choose with this team, but I think those 3 players are locks. This is my starting 5. I'd love to know yours, so please comment it down below. I'm going to do an episode next week breaking down my 10-man rotation. I'm still kind of figuring out that one, but whilst the Pistons didn't sign any superstars or that kind of thing this season, adding the likes of Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., drafting Bobby Clintman, Ron Holland, who could get minutes this season. Well, Ron definitely will. Bobby will see. There's plenty of players to choose from, even if none of them are going to make the Pistons kind of that playoff team. I would be shocked if they're a playoff team, but there's plenty of lineup combinations that make a whole heap of sense. So let me know your starting 5 and feel free to dive into your 10-man rotation if you feel the need to. I would love to read it. The next thing I want to hit on before we get out of here is a comment I saw from an article from an ESPN's Tim Bontemps. He did kind of an off-season anonymous review amongst some executives and scouts, which he kind of just sent some questions around to a group of people. They sent back responses and voted on certain things. And one of them was, the categories was, which draft pick surprised you the most, or was the biggest reach, sorry. And Ron Holland and the Pistons got 4 votes, and that was the most. I think they were tied with somebody else. I don't have it in front of me. But basically, this executive said the reason he voted for the Pistons was, he said, I feel bad for Cade Cunningham. they've been rebuilding for years, even though they never planned on it. And this pick, Ron Holland, signals they might need to blow up the roster and start over again. I just don't see how Holland plays with Asar and Jaden Ivey and all the other guys. That situation is a mess. Even when Holland was scoring in Vegas, it was so ugly to watch. So pretty adamant there in how poor the Holland pick was. But the topic I wanted to discuss more so is, are the Pistons actually a mess right now? And I feel like I've seen a lot of this with the national media in their response to the Pistons offseason overall, in kind of critiquing the Tobias Harris signing and people clowning Detroit for handing him that contract, which, yes, it might be a slight overpay, but I feel like Tobias Harris was always going to get something around 20 million a year annually, or maybe 17, 18. But I feel like the Pistons have been clowned a little bit unfairly, and I think they're the team that are easy to, beat down on. And to be honest, the way they performed last season, it's kind of in a way like I don't blame people for doing it. But I think people are still holding this organization to the past regime. There's been a lot of changes in the front office. We have a new GM, a whole new staff of executive vice presidents, apart from one, Eric Tallum, who was elevated, but there's a whole, pretty much 2/3 of the front office, it feels like, has been cleaned out. The coaching staff is pretty much, at least in terms of assistants, and the head coach have changed. Apart from Jarrett Jack, I think all the other assistants are new, at least the front of bench assistants, I should say. And then obviously the roster's seen changes. So I think to call this situation an absolute mess, I think, is an overstatement if you're just talking about this offseason. If you're talking about the Pistons in the past 4 years, then sure, it's hard to go around that. But the way I read this comment was that the Pistons situation now and going forward is a mess, which I disagree with. And I get why people are down on the Holland pick in terms of the shooting, and his fit alongside Asar and Ivy. I do see why people would think that's a mess and why that affects Cade. But the way I look at it is that Trajan Langdon, the way he's spoken about this team and the way I think he's going to build this team going forward, is going to be a lot more patient. I think this is really, truly a resetting of a rebuild. Like, I know that might hurt for some people to hear in terms of what they expect for this season, upcoming season, but this is kind of, I feel like Langdon is going to come in, and he has come in, and like, he's kind of starting fresh. There's no, like, the fact he hasn't made really a win now trade. He said the whole time he's looking to acquire assets. I think like, he would be very well aware that this team, as constructed with their young talent and the vets they've added, is still a lottery team. And I mean, I think there's some pros in being a lottery team this season with Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, and some of the other prospects that are meant to be in this draft, which I believe is meant to be pretty talented. And before you say, well, Jack, that they can't finish with the worst record, we've done that the past 4 years. Look at how the draft has gone for the Pistons recently. The Atlanta Hawks got the number 1 pick this year, and they were a play-in team. So I think, even if the Pistons have the 7th worst, like, the Pistons have had the worst record the past 2 years and had picked 5th. So you can still win high 20s games, low 30s games, and get a top 3 pick. That's just how the lottery works now. So I think Langdon would certainly have an eye on that and be wanting to pick some of his own young talent if the Pistons get close enough in this draft. So I think essentially that Langdon, this rebuild has reset, and I don't think it's a mess. In terms of cap space and that kind of thing, I don't think the Pistons made any, they didn't make any long-term signings in terms of new players. Obviously, they re-signed Cade to a max, which they were always going to do. The Fontecchio deal was only 2 years. The Fontecchio deal was only 2 years. Malik Beasley was only 1 year. Hardaway Jr. is a free agent. They basically haven't tied themselves to anything long-term. And I think I think we're going to see a lot of like Ivy, Asar, Duran on this team now opening night. But, you know, it feels like any of them, I think Langdon will be assessing them and figuring out if he likes them or that kind of thing. I don't think it's a lock. All those guys are here long term. I feel like there's much more probably of an investment in Holland. That's not to say he doesn't value. I don't think he doesn't value any of these other prospects. I just think this rebuild is kind of reset, and they just happen to have all these young players in Kate Cunningham as opposed to starting from ground zero. But I don't think this situation's a mess. I think the cap sheet, from what I've seen, is fine. They can still make plenty of moves and be flexible, and they've pretty much refreshed all key parts of the organization in terms of on-court performance. So I think call it a mess is a reach. Let me know your thoughts, because this is probably the best I felt about a Pistons team since the K draft, or since the Ivy Duran draft before that season. So in the last 2 years. So let me know your thoughts. Do you think the Pistons are a mess? I think it's a reach, but I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts as always. But that'll do it for today's show. I'll be back, as I said, on the regular schedule. So we'll be back Tuesday unless there's any breaking news. And as always, go Pistons.